welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Director and Business Line Leader for our Medical and Laboratory business at Intertek. And today I am thrilled to be joined by one of the members of my Sweden medical team, Shiva. Shiva, hi, how are you today?
Hi, Clarissa. I'm great. Thank you. How are you doing?
So good and so happy to have you here. One of
you.
my favorite things to do, just to kind of kick us off, is to always ask our guests how long you've been in the business, what you do, so you can give everybody a little bit of context before we dive into our topic for today.
Yes. So I've been with Intertek for the past 6 years. Before that, I studied as a medical engineer at KTH. So Intertek was my first real job. I have worked as a team lead for our medical testing department. So that's a bit of my background.
Yes, love it. And of course, our Sweden team is one of our largest medical teams. We're very established in the medical space. So a lot of projects that you've seen come through the door over the years that you've been with your tenure at Intertek. And one of the things that we get a lot of questions about is a certification program surrounding CB scheme, right? It's a big topic. We hear people talk a lot about it. Manufacturers oftentimes have a lot of questions. So maybe we can just kind of give a little context as to what it means when we say CB scheme, what the program is, and why would the CB scheme be a benefit to a manufacturer who makes medical products?
Yeah, for sure. So a CB scheme, or a certification body scheme, is a program developed by the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC for short, to facilitate the international trade of electronic equipments, including medical devices. It offers a streamlined approach to gaining a product safety certification in multiple countries through one single process. So it offers global acceptance through a single CB certificate, and of course its accompanying CB test reports, without the need for extensive additional testing. So it's very cost effective since it eliminates the need for extensive testing and certification processes. It offers a faster time to market, so by bypassing redundant testing, and better market expansion opportunities by easier market entry. And this could be especially of significance for small to medium-sized companies, since they might not have the resources to meet the certification requirements of all these different countries. So they could focus all their time and resources on innovation and product development rather than regulatory overhead.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said a few things there, which I think are really key to highlight on. One is the streamlined approach, right? It really does help a manufacturer to streamline their approach to testing, right? Especially in the medical space, since we are utilizing a harmonized standard with 60601, the same for laboratory products with 61010, right? You really have a lot of benefit going this, CB scheme route with this mutually recognized test format, following this format, and then utilizing that. And I think the other thing you said, which I think is really important to hit on as well, is it doesn't then warrant extensive additional testing. Obviously, within the report, there's deviations that are tested to for specific countries, dependent on voltages and requirements, but it does help you. It's not a one size fits all, 100% access into all of the countries that participate in the CB scheme, but I do think it gives you quite a leg up, right? We still see some countries maybe will require a registration or to see a product in country or a bit of in-country testing. But if you are globalizing a product, if you're taking it around the world, I think CB scheme is such a great place to start, especially, again, a benefit for us in the medical space with that harmonized standard. We test to the IEC format, we test through that and then go to those deviations. So I think that can be really beneficial if you're looking to have, a wider access, take your CB scheme report and certificate to one of the member bodies, and then, utilize that for market acceptance. And maybe they'll have a few other requirements, but, it's not as extensive. So we touched on it a little bit. Obviously, there's standards that are used in the CB scheme. Are all of our medical standards available in the CB scheme, right? Are all standards covered under CB? Does someone have to look to check to see if a standard is a CB standard, right? How does that work? We know, of course, we have the 60601, which is harmonized, but, how does someone confirm if all standards are utilized for CV scheme?
I mean, the standards that are utilized for CV scheme, we have the IEC 60601-1, as you mentioned, and the collateral standards, so to say. We have the general or the core standards that covers the safety and essential performance of the medical products. We have the -1-2, the EMC standards, -1-6, the usability standard, and the list goes on.
Of course.
Yes, and then we have the particular standards, which are more product specific, depending on what type of product you have. So if you have, for example, an X-ray equipment, or if you have an infusion pump or ventilator, then there are different particular standards that could be applicable for you. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, and I think, the point there being too, right, the majority of the standards are within the CV scheme,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
And I think the other really great benefit of CV and the way that the IEC is structured, right, all of the information you can look on the website, so you can see every standard that is recognized under CV scheme. You can see every version of the standard. You can also see all of the CV test labs, right? So it's very easy to understand, okay, when you talk about some of these particular standards in the medical space, right, as we get into infusion pumps or generators or whatever it might be, you can look to the CV scheme and understand, okay, where do people do this testing globally? What test labs are approved to do this, and what versions of the standard are still included? And so I think that makes it, a super easy, way to utilize the program, right, and be able to understand what's in scope. I think the other thing to note on that, right, is each test house, right? So each of our medical labs globally has a different level of CV scheme accreditation and different standards in their scope. And all of that information is publicly available as well, which makes it really easy when you're trying to figure out where you want to do testing.
Yeah, exactly. I also think that the IEC website is very easy to navigate through. I don't know if because I've been there a lot and worked, but I think, all this information you can easily find them on the IEC website. You can also look for deviations, which countries have deviations. So that information can also be found there. So yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So maybe we can touch on that a little bit, because I think there's a lot of questions about countries and country specific, right? Who participates in the CV scheme, what's included, like just by nature of the test report, right? Which deviations are always included, who accepts the CV scheme. So there's a lot of questions surrounding the country. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are more than 50 countries worldwide that accept the CB scheme. So I'm not going to mention all of them, but some of the regions are Europe, North America, Asia, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and some of the main countries, just to mention a few, would be United States, Canada, China, Japan, Germany, Italy. Yeah, so the list goes on.
Yes. A lot of the big targets, of course, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And then what about with the deviations, as you mentioned, right? So there are some standard test deviations within the report that we're generally looking to. Maybe you can touch on that just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, each country might have their own national deviations, which is based on their own laws and regulatory environments, and they are imposed on the IEC standards. So usually these countries, they recognize the IEC standards, but they have their own deviations as well. And it could be included in the testing from the beginning. So if the manufacturer knows which countries they want to target and they want to gain market entry to, so they can just mention that to the NCBs when they ask for a CB certification process, and it can be included in their testing from the beginning, which is really good. It's very cost efficient, very good for the manufacturers, since it can be included and they don't have to do all this additional testing later on when they want to gain access to other markets.
Yeah, getting it done right up front is really beneficial. And I think too, right, of course, that's one of the reasons why we always ask when we get into testing, right, really wanting to understand what someone's plan is with the product, not just for the next 12 months, but let's talk about the next 24 months, the next 36 months, right? Is it a benefit to do this now, knowing that, oh, you plan to go to Japan 9 months from now. Oh, you plan to go to Australia next year, right? Is it a benefit to look at the CB format, at the beginning when you're doing testing rather than coming back to it later, which obviously, poses its own challenges. So, another question I think that comes up a lot, right, is when people are trying to wrap their head around CB scheme, how do I notify, like, do I put a CB scheme mark on my product? Like, how would someone know that I did CB and went through this process? Like, what does the CB scheme deliver to you that, would let someone know that you've gone through testing for CB?
I mean, you have the CB certificate and you have the accompanying CB test reports that really facilitate market entry to a lot of countries that recognize CB schemes. So the certificate is what you have for, and then you can use them also in other certification processes, for example, in your FDA submission or as a basis for your CE marking. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, right? So sometimes people are wondering, am I going to get this CB mark? It's not a mark, right? You have that certificate. No. That is what says that you've gone through the process, that you've met all of the requirements of the scheme, that you've gone through all your testing, you receive that certificate, and then that's what you utilize along with the accompanying test report to go to those countries, right? And make sure that you can use that in either a submission, as you mentioned, right? So putting it in your technical file, putting it in your submission to the FDA, and or when you're going to some of the other markets for market entry, they may just ask to see the CB cert and or CB scheme and certain report, and then you may have to pay a registration or whatever their process is in that local country. Exactly. There are some testing requirements we know that are a little bit different, and some product requirements that are a little bit different with CB scheme, with components and the changes and things that you can make to a report. So that's something I think that comes up a lot with manufacturers. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit, just in terms of, okay, what are some of the requirements with components for CB scheme that's a little bit different? What are some of the requirements with report updates and upkeep that are different from some of the other reporting formats and schemes?
Yeah, I mean, I would generally say that we usually follow the same requirements, even when we don't have a CB scheme testing. But yes, I can understand that's something that it's more restrictive on components, for example. But I would say it's a normal kind of testing. You have to make sure that the components have the right certificate, and this is something that the IEC standard, the general standard, refers to. So that is our reference for what kind of standards the components have to be certified against. And the rest of the requirements is just the normal electrical safety and mechanical and all of that, and that the IEC touches upon. So I wouldn't say it's very different from a non-CB scheme testing, actually.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of, instances though, when, maybe someone will purchase a power supply or a battery or something. You do have to make sure that they have those right approvals, as you alluded to, right? And the CB scheme does require that there's CB approval for certain components. Yeah. So that's something to think about early phases, right? When you're working on your product development, if you know that CB is something that you want to do and something that you want to go forward with, knowing those requirements up front and familiarizing yourself with the requirements for components under CB scheme, I think is super helpful to avoid any kind of headaches and pain on the back end. If you realize, we bought this off-the-shelf power supply and it's not CB certified, then you have to go through that process of either sourcing something different or testing that. So there are a few things I think that you can do kind of ahead of time to make it easy on yourself. You made a really good point there too, Shiva. Obviously, at most of our medical labs, with most evaluations, it's very common practice for us to follow the same process that we would, the same as we would for a CB scheme evaluation. But when we get into CB, as we talked about a little bit earlier, we have to make sure that we have those standards within the scope of the lab where the testing is being done. The engineers are qualified for those standards, right? Because it is a scheme that we're accredited to. So we have specific engineers who test to specific standards and specific sites where they can do that testing. Even though we follow that rigorous kind of process overall for evaluations, we still have to make sure that those are in scope.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. And this is, as you mentioned, the IEC standards is a big help for us in understanding which components should have which kind of certificate. And so it's just we look at in the IEC standards, and that's you can see which CB certificate each component should have. And as you mentioned, for example, a power supply, we call it the heart of the product. So
Yes.
it is very important that it is CB certified. If it's not, we usually have to pause the project and yes, to find a solution. So if it has to be tested in appliance, which can mean that the testing process will be a lot longer and yeah, more troublesome for the manufacturers. Sure.
Yeah, and I think, the second part of that discussion too, right, from a manufacturer's perspective, when we look at an ETL report or a North American certification report, right, that's a report where we're working together, we're allowing you to put your mark on our product, right? So we have our specific rules governed under OSHA for an NRTL report. For CB scheme, it's a different scheme, right? A different report format, different expectations. So can you maybe talk a little bit about the requirements for notifying us if you make changes, right? Product changes, design changes, how you update the report, how that then looks on your report and your certificate, because obviously it's different than the process that we follow that OSHA guides us to for our NRTL type reports.
Yes, exactly. So first of all, I would like to say that, as you say, for CB scheme testing, we have to follow CB rules. And the good thing about that is that then all of the other NCBs follow the same rules, which means that you can take those test reports and your CB certificate, and all the other regulatory bodies will accept them because they know what kind of rules you have followed. So that's the good thing about the CB scheme. And yeah, but I think keeping your CB report up to date, a lot of the responsibility falls on the manufacturers, since as you mentioned, we don't have this, for example, quarterly factory inspections as we have for the US or Canada market reports. So a lot of it falls on the manufacturers to keep an eye on the standard updates, if there are new standard versions, or as soon as they make a modification to the product, they should notify their NCB so we can update the report. We probably don't have to do a full testing. We might have to do some testing just to make sure that that the product is still complying with the IEC requirements. But yeah, it has to be notified to the NCB so that we can make sure that the report is up to date. Yeah.
Yeah, just because you don't have follow-up inspections, right? Just because there's not quarterly audits of the facility, you're still required to keep your CB scheme report up to date if you want to be utilizing it. When you make component changes, you're allowed to make technical amendments. So oftentimes people will group those together, right? You make some component changes, you reopen up the report, you update that with the new components. They don't always require testing, right? We always evaluate that to see, okay, what changes are you making? Is it impacting the product? Is it impacting product integrity? Is it something that would require additional testing? Is it a like for like, right? We oftentimes see people put information in their CB scheme reports that are allowing for equivalence, right? Because we understand that there's product changes and component changes. So just because it doesn't have that same level of follow-up scrutiny, they do have a lot of requirements and rules around updating the report, making sure that it's up to date, how many technical amendments you can make, reissuance of a CB scheme certificate. You'll see within the report different amendment numbers as you go through. So it would be the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment as you go through and update it to really keep it accurate and up to date. And as always, right, that responsibility is yours. If you are going through that process and owning the product, you own those reports as well to make sure that they are accurate and up to date. So if you put it in your technical file or if you send it out to a country, it would be representative of the product as it's being built and as it's being manufactured.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, the CB rule states that we cannot have more than 3 technical modifications and before we have to do a full testing of the product. So yeah, that is all you can see that in your CB certificate. Yes.
And then what about on the back end, right? So I decide, I want to go through my evaluation. I'm going to do my NRTL report for North American market access. I'm going to do CB scheme rather than just an IEC informative test report. want to go forward for CB scheme. I go through my process, I get my ETL report. What's the process for receiving a CB scheme report and certificate? Does it come right away? Is there a review process? Like, how does that work? Does it add additional time when I do CB scheme? What does that look like?
You mean additional CB scheme to the NRTL report, or?
Yeah, what's the reporting and review process? How does that work?
I mean, we use a CB scheme certification process as a basis for NRTL reports. And the process is that as soon as you request for a CB testing certificate, then so you submit your device and your documentation, and we go through those, and we test the product and see that it complies with all the relevant IC standards, and it is, of course, reviewed by our reviewers. That's the process for receiving.
Yeah. So what I want to hit on there too, right? So the same thing that we noted before, right? You have specific engineers that are qualified for CB schemes, specific reviewers. There is a bit of a lag at the end, right? You get your NRTL report. If you've had the initial factory inspection, you'll get your authorization to mark. With the CB scheme, that has to go through an additional level of review before the certificate is issued, right? So it's a little bit of a process. So it won't necessarily come on the day that you finish your testing, but we are quite quick in turning around the CB scheme certificate. So then you would have that, kind of in your hand that you could utilize if you're looking to go to the different markets or looking to submit that as part of a reference packet to go into a different country or different area and get that market conformity. So it is a big benefit for medical device manufacturers. I think, overall we see, 75-80% of medical device manufacturers wanting to go forward with CB scheme just because of the globalization of medical products in the medical market. Everyone is trying to take their products and, reach more patients and give more access to healthcare. So it's something that can be a big benefit from an efficiency standpoint. Shiva, as you mentioned earlier, right? It's efficient, it's cost effective, and it really does kind of open that up as you're looking, especially sometimes, as we said, with sales and marketing plans, sometimes people want to go to other countries and it's part of a long-term plan. So it can be a big benefit up front. Before we close today, Shiva, is there anything else you want to add about the CB scheme? Any other notes or tips or things that people should consider if they're looking at CB?
I mean, I would say it's a great start. It facilitates the market entry to a lot of different countries. So I would say it's a great way to go ahead. I have some tips that I think if you want to start a CB certification process, it would ease the process a lot for both manufacturers and your NCB. And that would be to identify the relevant standards for your specific medical equipment really early on the developmental phase of the product, since if you don't have the standards in mind, you might have to go back and make some design changes. This is not something that anybody wants.
Nope.
And then also be very thorough with your technical documentation and make sure that they are prepared before you apply for a CB certificate.
Yeah, absolutely. And you took my tip, right, which is the early planning, early engagement, right? So really thinking about it on the front end. CB is not something that's easy to add in on the back end, as we touched on some of the component requirements, test lab requirements. We are held to a very high standard. It's a stringent process to be accredited for CB scheme. And so it's something that they, is taken very seriously in the industry. It is mutually recognized, right? So there is that high level of scrutiny. So if it's something that you're looking to do, it's really beneficial to plan during your design phase, know where you want to go, know the type of testing that you need to have done. And of course, you can engage with us early on if you want to talk about it, understand what standards apply, understand more about product specific requirements for CB. If you're looking at your specific type of product or product line, we're happy to have those discussions and help to point you in the right direction towards the standards that would apply, the versions that would apply, and what you need to do to meet the CB scheme requirements. So Shiva, it was so great to have you on today. Really appreciate your time and this great discussion on CB scheme. If anyone has questions, as always, they can reach out. We're happy to answer those one-on-one, but thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Clarissa.